So, man, I love watching and hearing one of my favorite city foresters, Tim Buchanan, had to say about all the varieties of oaks that he's trialed and used in Fort Collins, a lot of which I see how we bring them to production. Uh, and so we're going to reveal a little bit about that today. So as aspiring that as that is, what I think is really important, and I'm going to try to bring to light, is an understanding of what it takes to take what you're hearing in terms of the other presenters uh, when they're out discovering plants, when they're trialing these plants for decades, then they find a great seed source, and then how do we actually make that tree come to life? How long does that take to take that dream into reality? And then obviously what we heard from Emmanuel was amazing. Um, so inspiring. In my background, like I said, I've been in the nursery business my whole life since I was 12 years old. Didn't think I was going to be in the nursery business, went to college and decided I want to be an entrepreneur. So I look at this industry a little bit differently than a lot of my colleagues. Even though I have roots, obviously, that go back. You know, Gary Epstein and my father went to kindergarten together, all through elementary, high school, and college. So, you know, I have that point of perspective, but obviously when we service landscape contractors and deal with landscape architects every day, we feel like we're in a unique position in the marketplace to understand what your needs and desires are. All these amazing plans, concepts, so well thought out, like Emmanuel explained, to bring plants, horticulture, design together in our communities to really transform them. We want to be a part of that solution, and you're going to learn today why it's really hard to do that, but that why we're also in a unique position at this time in the history of the green industry, particularly the nursery business, to try to make a difference to make this a more efficient and easier reality, but also for you to get a good understanding as to why sometimes it's so difficult right now to realize that dream. So first, I'm going to help you understand a little bit how the nursery business is structured. It's been around a long, long time. Economists would consider it a mature industry, and that's just defined in meaning that it's not growing exponential like iPhones, right? It's been around a long time. Growth is pretty moderate. However, it is a highly disorganized market. You have literally thousands of growers across the country and thousands of garden centers and hundreds of landscape distribution centers and thousands of contractors, all trying to put together a plan to make these things come to reality. And 80% of the owners are baby boomers or older. So we're in this generational shift of consolidation that's happening. And so there's great opportunities with that as well as great challenges. You'll learn a little bit more about that through the presentation. So here you'll see at the top, young plant growers. Young plant growers are the people that propagate young plants. They help find these seedlings, graft and bud them into trees or small young plants. They typically serve a national market, most things being equal, meaning when they look at their production plans, they're looking at the entire country, largely then looking at where most plants go, which is not Colorado, unfortunately, although a lot of plants come to Colorado. Typically, their main focus is in the Midwest and the East. And so a lot of the things you heard Tim talk about in terms of soil issues and our climate issues and what makes trees and plants successful here, most national growers are not taking that into consideration. And as much as we're talking about the importance and the value of native plants, particularly with the great work Plant Select does, and Ross forgot to mention I serve on the board of Plant Select as well, is that the native plants, particularly intermountain native plants, are considered niche plants to these young plant growers. So they are not focused on our market. Our market is a flyover state to them. And so a lot of the decisions are made with that lens and context. So when they're producing these plants, they're producing them to go to the next round of growers. So oftentimes they're producing these young plants and then sending them to finished growers. And finished growers are often regional or local market focused. So I would be partly a finished grower, also what we would call a distributor. So the finished growers take these younger plants and then grow them on to what might be the landscape grade that you guys are all specifying and using. These are usually the people that you may go and tag trees from, or that you interface with closer to when your projects are coming close to reality. You also might be using reference guides from the National Young Plant Growers. And so there's some things we'll talk about later where that's a great opportunity and there's a lot of great information, but there's things in that information that is lacking for this market specifically, which makes your guys' job really challenging, and makes it more important to make sure we're aligned in communicating with people that are really focused on this market. So, so let's take young plant growers, for example. They may choose to produce thousands and thousands of plants or millions, and then they get to decide, they decide based on the orders they get from these finished growers, who to sell their product to. And so they may grow 5,000 of one variety, and they may end up allocating it in quantities between 50, 100 lots, 500 lots to finished growers throughout the country. Those finished growers then produce that product and decide where they're going to sell it to. So some of these channels you'll see on the left are what I would call consumer-focused channels, right? They're focused on homeowners. And it's really a pretty simple market. Homeowners are the most ignorant customer out there typically. And so they're basing most things based on ornamental characteristics. To the right is what I call the professional channel, which most people have not even identified or understand what that is. So those products oftentimes end up as a result of the demand that is created by specifiers, landscape architects, foresters, and designers, are interfaced with the landscape contractor, interfaced with the channel partners, whether it's a distributor, the landscaper buying directly, or the broker, a sales broker. That's how plants get supplied ultimately to these projects. That's how it exists currently. In this market, you can see the landscaper, the consumer, the specifier often are multiple stages away from the young plant growers. So there's a big disconnect of communication between the two, and oftentimes they don't know what they're doing. Young plant growers, as you'll see soon, their timelines in which they consider their planning, their project timelines, are in years and in decades. So they have so the growers are farmers essentially. Their mindsets are pretty static and pretty constant, because it takes so long to develop their product. Whereas specifiers are constantly changing, constantly innovating, constantly, every project is different, every project is unique. And so that's a paradox, right? We've got the people deciding what to use in the landscape, constantly changing what they want to do. And then you've got the plants, people that are producing the plants, rarely changing what they're doing. In fact, their entire decision for production is looking in the rearview mirror, mostly looking at the past 3 to 5 year sales history to inform them on what to produce, rather than what is the market in the future, the very near future, producing. So that's a challenge in from supply trying to meet demand. So this is a great slide. A little nugget I received and was shared from our friends at J. Frank Schmidt Nursery from in company. Nancy Bewley was nice to share this with me. The concept here is to understand that plants are not like nuts and bolts. You go to Home Depot and every bolt you get is identically the same, just iterated different by size. Trees in particular don't work that way. This slide, I don't know how well you can see it, shows the product timeline of producing a plant called exclamation plane tree. Not a highly recommended tree for Colorado, but the example here is to show you the timeline it takes to produce from the propagative cutting, from the clone cutting taking in year 1 through the entire production cycle to a large caliper tree at different size scales, how many years of production it takes for that to come to market. This is a fast growing tree relative to oaks. Typically would come to market a year or 2 faster than most oak varieties would. When you also talk about the time frame that they were developing and research to get this clone to market, took them decades in production and in research and in trialing before this has even come to market. And then it takes time to produce the numbers of scale to actually make an impact on the market as far as quantities go. Here's a little bit greater detail on how long it takes to produce plants. Trees in particular, of course, take the longest. So it kind of goes through year by year. What are the processes it takes for this plant to come to reality for your projects? And as you can see, there's lots of touches that happen. A lot of times here where people are interacting with the plants. And so you just get an idea that even though landscape architect friends and colleagues I talk to, you guys are planning these projects for years and years, and obviously you can tell how passionate Emmanuel is for the great design and how thoughtful and detailed he is in coming up with that concept. But the plant material that goes into those projects, particularly as they get larger into woody plants, have taken decades to produce. So you can see there's an incongruency here between the vision of where we want to go from the design standpoint and how actually bringing those plants to market can take a lot more time in advance. And the current way that they come to market, it makes it very challenging for niche plants, or as you heard many times Tim Buchanan talk about, you may want to try one of these in a very special situation. Finding those plants are very, very difficult. And we'll talk a little bit more about diversity and how there's some paradoxes within diversity as well. So there aren't many hacks when it comes to the time it takes to make a plant. Unfortunately, biology is biology. Plant physiology is plant physiology. You can't really speed up the process that much. Now I will tell you, there's been more innovation in the last decade in terms of the way plants are produced to bring them to market faster, constantly focusing on taking steps out of that process. So that's been a great thing, and it's been very helpful. But to help you guys kind of understand, from seed to 2.5-inch caliper, a tree can take up to 8 years. So that 2.5-inch oak that we are planting today was a seed in 2012. So when you think about the economic conditions we were in coming out of the recession in 2012, that informs you onto why we might have plant shortages today. Junipers and broadleaf evergreens in a number 3 or number 5 container can take 3 to 4 years to come to market from seed or cutting. Grasses perennials are much faster, but the speed with which we can get them to scale, I'll take Blonde Ambition for example. Blonde Ambition is now our number 2 selling ornamental grass. It's shot up the charts like crazy within just the last 2 years. But we still can't get enough of it, because you have to take the parent plant and divide it. And you can only divide it so many times to make more plants, and then do that over and over again. So we are out in the market buying as much young plants on that plant as we can, just to make the 1 gallons our market demands, and it doesn't seem to be enough. So that's very exciting, but it gets to be frustrating as a supplier too, because you can't get there any faster. Regardless of how great a plant is, sometimes it takes some time and coordination to get it there. Young plants are a national market and planned for accordingly, meaning sometimes a hot plant is great for this region, and sometimes it's a national plant, and we only get allocated certain percentages because growers in their product cycles want to not have concentrations of customers. They believe that one of their ways of deferring risk is to have many, many customers. So the challenge with that, when you deal with large commercial landscapes, for example, is trying to get together enough of that supply to service that job, where all the trees match and look alike, is a significant challenge. And then new plants are often limited in supply because of this strategy or the time it just takes. And Intermountain natives are often seed-only plants. So that means sometimes they're very challenging, both to get those seeds to germinate and also in production. Native plants in Colorado don't grow naturally in a soilless media nursery scenario. They tend to not like a lot of organic matter. They tend to not like the watering. They tend to actually not like fertilizer. So that makes it kind of difficult in a nursery setting to get them produced at scale. And because they are niche plants on the scale of the national production cycle, regional or local growers are really the ones that are developing the young plants for this. and they are oftentimes limited in scale also. So that's a challenge to trying to get more woody native plants, in particular, the ones that Plant Select wants to bring to market. The ones that Plant Select's been really successful with have had broader regional or national appeal. So Hot Wings, Tertarian Maple, for example, and Pondy Butte Sand Cherry had been picked up by national growers because they're used in a lot of different markets, and they can be produced in Oregon, Minnesota, the markets where a lot of these woody young plants are made at scale. They work there. Some of our Intermountain natives will rot out in the wintertime in Oregon, or also in Minnesota. So that makes it a challenge on where we can get these plants produced from. You might be surprised what a niche item is. I know here plants that are staples here in Colorado, that are in high demand here in Colorado, we consider them to be core and essential plants here. Other places of the country never use them, don't see them, aren't familiar with them, so they are not considered core plants there. So we have some factors with our alkaline soils and our arid climate that make those plants unique production challenges in other areas. Reference guides have no indication to the relative difficulty to produce or the availability of items. And what I'll say about that is, for example, some of our great partners and suppliers we work with, J. Frank Schmidt is one that has a phenomenal reference guide that many architects, foresters rely on as a reference. But because it's a national platform, it's somewhat generic. It won't talk about alkaline tolerance as much. It won't talk about some of these issues that we have. And so, it's incomplete information, and that's not necessarily the fault of Schmidt. That's just because Colorado is a unique climate. That's really where the relationship with someone local to your market can help inform your decisions. The other thing that I don't think anyone has ever really occurred to is that catalog gives you no indication as to the relative rarity or the quantities that are actually produced and available. In the reference guide, you guys don't get access to that information. Us as customers get access to that information, so we are informed. But the way that information is presented makes plants that may be marginal or appear to be likely to be useful here. They don't tell you that this plant is produced at 10% of the volume of the other. So that's a particular challenge that architects face when they're trying to use diversity and trying to do more plants to really know what availability looks like. And obviously we talked about plants are not all iterated like bolts. Young plants are produced in certain sizes to maximize production for the final output. So in our market, 2 and 2.5 inch caliper trees are the staple sizes. And so throughout the production process, things are done to the tree so that when it gets to be a 2 or 2.5 inch caliper tree, it's finished. What that means is when it's a 1 inch caliper tree or 1.5 inch caliper tree, it does not look at all like the 2.5 inch caliper tree. So when you try to value engineer or do something like that, your expectations and understanding of what a 1.5 inch caliper tree looks like, take for example, coffee tree, you're going to get a tree with no branches. That's what that tree looks like when it's juvenile. The older it gets, the more mature it looks. And so that's just a frame of reference of understanding that is helpful for architects to understand, as much as we try to treat these plants as widgets, they are living organisms. So just like, my 14-year-old son is 6'1", he's still juvenile and immature. A 3 or 4-year-old tree is juvenile and just won't look the same. So that's just something to understand. And then obviously plants produced by seed, especially natives, are more difficult to germinate and produce. So that means that someone has to go collect those seeds. And weather and climate can sometimes mess up the seed in that year. We already heard from Tim about the hybridization that can happen. So, a little known secret is we're running out of people who are out there collecting a lot of these seeds. A lot of them have been Tim's age or older, and they're aging out. And so there aren't just young millennials wanting to go pick acorns out of native ranges at scale to bring them to the young plant growers to produce rootstocks or parent trees for clones. So it's a real challenge to try to bring up production numbers to what the market might want, even on plants that are great. It's one of my favorite phrases I like to talk about. Colorado is where plants go to die. And I kind of say that a little bit self-serving. I mean, obviously, climate here is very, very tough. Our soils are very high in calcium carbonate, which makes them have a high pH. They're highly variable in their soil texture, from sandy to heavy clay to rocky, with little to no natural organic matter. Most plants that we're bringing in, particularly when it comes to trees, aren't native to here, and they're adapting. And so where they come from, these are not the soil conditions that they come from. Tim kept talking about finding pH soils of 7.5 or lower. The only places you're going to find those in Colorado are in alluvial areas, areas where, over the course of thousands or millions of years, flooding has happened, and the soil in that area is floodplain soil. There's only very few areas where that's true in Colorado. And right now, most of the new construction is not in those areas. So you can pretty much bet if it's a new construction in a suburb, you're going to have a pH upwards or of over 8. So that makes it very difficult. Water quality, this is something that I don't think is discussed enough. Most of our water comes from either surface water from the mountains, which is very clean and neutral, or well water, whether it's alluvial well water or deep well water. It comes through that alluvium, through that calcium carbonate soil, or rock even deeper down. So it's very high in calcium carbonates. And so what that tends to do chemically is it makes the water hard to buffer. And what that means is the plants can't take up the nutrients that we give them unless the water is acidified. Most cities are not acidifying their water. In fact, Denver is going to make their water more alkaline. They're making their water go from neutral to a pH of 8. So we can expect that our challenges with chlorosis are going to become even worse, where Denver water provides water, because adding calcareous soils to very alkaline water makes it even more difficult for plants that are not adapted to that to be successful. Obviously, we talked climate is an obvious situation here. Naturally, semi-arid steppe climate, we get less than, on average, 15 inches of natural precipitation per year, and we're prone to drought. That water doesn't come evenly, obviously, either on the plains, and our high elevation causes winter sun damage on many plants. So there can be perfectly adaptable plants for soil pH, but when the winter time comes, because we get freeze thaw of the soil, if it's an understory tree, it may dry out and die. So it may be perfectly cold hardy, but it may not tolerate our dry winters with extreme temperature swings or our bright sunlight intensity. Weather, killing freezes late and early spring and fall. We're the hail capital of the country, and wind and low humidity stresses our trees. So like Tim talked about, these trees in their native climates get, 60, 70% larger than they will get here because it's such a tough climate. Now, Colorado is a big market, and as things are evolving, there are a lot of finished producers, particularly on the B&B side of tree production, that have started to change their production practices to maximize the adaptability and survivability of that product in this market. So there's been great innovations that have been done in the culture of root systems, transplantation of trees, particularly with oaks, things that have been historically difficult to transplant from bare root. We're doing a lot more production to increase the fibrosity and the quality of the root systems, which is really helping the finished product to be more successful. That takes a lot of time, but as you guys have an opportunity to become more educated on the culture of how we're producing these plants, these are great questions to ask your suppliers, which are going to help you understand what's more successful in your landscapes. Diversity is a big thing, right? It sounds great, but it's really, really hard to achieve. That little bug there is the emerald ash borer. That little guy came from Asia and has literally turned upside down the way we specify and plan for tree production in this country. Many municipalities have mandated matrices on specification of plants that many of you have to deal with. We can only use so many of certain size varieties and cultivars to try to eliminate the potential for the next emerald ash borer. We are trying more and more fringe plants in this climate that's not well adapted for them. the number one lens is we're looking at just absolute cold hardiness, which is really not a good enough indication for whether it's going to be successful here. As a result, we end up killing a lot of plants at a young age because of these other abiotic factors that hurt the plants. We end up killing a lot of young plants, more so than what actually the invasive species are killing. And the ability to become much more diverse is limited, as a lot of the new trees coming to market are cultivars. They're clones of Quercus macrocarpa, or they're clones of Quercus muhlenbergii, right? So, you know, they're not going to have any more actual resistance to a potential invasive pest. So we're not, our diversity we're getting isn't actually new species. They're just clones of the same species. And diversity honestly by itself is counterproductive to scale and efficiency. So the more diversity we want, the harder it is to be efficient and scale up production to meet those demand needs. The harder it is for these young plant growers to forecast demand and create the products that they need. So the way we're currently going to market and getting information makes this a very difficult goal to achieve. Now, I just want to be clear. It doesn't mean I don't think it's a goal that we should try to achieve. We just will have to go about it a different way than we've had in the past. Another thing to talk about, what happens in other parts of the country impacts Colorado directly and indirectly. So invasive species aren't universally invasive. What might be invasive in the Midwest or the East is not necessarily invasive in Colorado. So because markets for young plants are national, young plant producers react to that. You know, recently Indiana, Pennsylvania have banned ornamental calorie pear from their states. You can't plant them, you can't grow them. Whereas here, they're not invasive at all. So right now that's producing an oversupply because those markets essentially shut them down with very little notice. You know, we've got 8 and 10 years of production coming online, and 1 year, suddenly there's no more demand. So then that plant has to find another home. So in the short term, that creates a glut of material. Prices may come down, availability may be great, but ultimately shortages follow because growers are like, I'm not going to do that again. Young plant growers see the demand stopping. They move the Titanic on those categories. And in some time, you're not aware of it in this market where it's not an issue. You know, 5 years from now, we might be finding ornamental pear to be very expensive and hard to find, which sounds crazy and insane. But these are the types of things that impact us locally. Another big trend that's happening is plants are fashion, and there are designers breeding the future. So what we've talked about here and on all this is about plant discovery, looking for new plants, native plants, you know, trying to see if we can produce them vegetatively, taking what nature has discovered and making that part of our production plan. There is a massive trend in our industry towards breeding, which is sort of the opposite spectrum. Now, breeding is largely focused on the consumer market, not the professional market as much. So they're looking at the ornamental characteristics of blooming plants, compactness, ease of use, ease for the grower to bring to market. And they're developing and breeding these plants specifically for those channels. And when they breed them, they can patent them. They can produce them clonally, which means they have very consistent yields, very consistent production cycles, which is great for the grower. They can patent them and get royalties on every unit sold. They can license these plants to only select growers, which has been great for the grower. It's really helped growers stay viable and vibrant with the challenges that they face. These branded plants, you might see them from Proven Winners or First Editions. They increase the perceived value to and performance to the consumer, which the brand drives the price up, right? Which is great. It's great for the grower. It's great for plants, right? And I'll tell you a quick story. We became a Gold Key grower for Proven Winners, and their sales rep came here to talk to us about their plants, and they have over 300 varieties that they've marketed and developed with the Proven Winner brand, Color Choice Shrubs. And so their sales rep is here and going after hydrangea after hydrangea. I don't know how many varieties of hydrangea they have, 60, 70. Beautiful, gorgeous plants, amazing plants, just not good for Colorado's climate. And so once we sorted through the 300 varieties that they have in their offering, 25 or so, and some we're just going to trial, are suitable for our climate. So that just kind of goes to show you that the focus of that from national plant breeders and producers is not on Colorado. It's not on native plants, and it's not on seedling plants at all. And with more consolidation, this is a challenge because these large producers are moving more and more in that direction, more and more towards what is focused on the consumer channel and less on the professional channel, because they don't understand it, they don't identify it, and they don't know what the needs are of it because they're so far away from it. So that's going to be a challenge in the future for us to make every job that we want and what we need to do in Colorado to be successful come to life. We talked a little bit about before, consolidation is happening, and there's an opportunity to reimagine this industry. There's fewer and fewer young plant growers. There's mergers happening in the young plant space, and changing the way they're coming to production to stay viable at their scale. Larger finished plant growers are more and more aligned with distributors like ourselves and have influence in regional and local markets. That's really where, for landscape architects and designers, I believe the future is to create our own supply chain. The challenge is forecasting. With these long timelines, how do you know what you're going to need to sell 8 years from now? How am I going to know what to produce 3 years from now? These are the questions that growers face every day. And so they don't change what they do very much. That's why they have to look in their rear view mirror, not forward through the windshield. So that's a paradox. The key is communication and coordination is going to be required, and some paradigm shifts between owners and landscape architects and how we go about sourcing plant material is going to be necessary to shift this paradigm and to continue to enable you guys to create the environments we need in the future in these markets, particularly in Colorado. So I'll tell you a quick story. The professional channel is not recognized or understood yet. We're also a licensed grower of First Editions, and that's a plant brand developed by Bailey Nurseries, one of the largest nursery growers in North America, who is now taking their genetics internationally. Very professional, large-scale, high-quality operation with very sophisticated people. I was touring their facility and meeting with their marketing people in Minnesota, and we were talking about the breeding they've been doing, particularly on plants for the Southeast. It's an exciting market for them to try to do some more genetics in. It doesn't apply to Colorado, but as they were going through, they were telling me about their market research, about how they've been interviewing consumers and going to garden centers, and their typical customer, they believe, is Mrs. Jones, and she's 50 years old, and she's got an income of over $100,000 a year, and here's all the things she needs to help make informed decisions as a consumer to buy more plants. And then after that speech, they started introducing me to their top 10 sellers. And of their top 5, 3 of the top 5 were these new introductions going in the Southeast. And so I stopped their marketing people real quick and I said, okay, can you tell me about these top 3 varieties? Because they don't come to our market, I know who they are. But can you tell me where they're used? Is Mrs. Jones, your target market customer you just talked about, is she the one buying Distillium and Loropetalum? And they're like, well, no, they're used in mass plantings on commercial landscapes in the Southeast. They're replacing Raphiolepis and all these other things. So I said, so let me understand, your top sellers are going to a professional channel, but all of your marketing efforts and your research about the consumers is the consumer channel. And they stopped for a second. They looked at me like, what's the professional channel you're talking about? Now, that's not to be a criticism of our partners and friends in the nursery business. It's just a reflection on how disconnected they are from the realities of where their plants are used. And that their top selling volume plants are really used by specifiers. And what are the needs and concerns of specifiers if you're going to breed a plant to be successful? What are the things that you need to identify? And I just pointed out to them because that's who they need to be talking to. If they're going to engineer a plant or design or create a plant that's going to be used in volume, they need to be talking about to the people, what's the utility of those plants and how are they going to be developed for them? And then more importantly, how are they going to align their supply chain to ensure that those projects are fulfilled? And that's a really large disconnect that happens in our industry right now. The way plant material is sourced from grower to finished grower to distributor makes it very challenging. So one of those challenges is every one of your projects that you guys design is a customized engineered design. They're absolutely amazing. Everyone is different. No two are alike. And that's really cool. But the challenge is for growers, they like predictability. They like consistency, and they produce for that because of the risks and the timescales involved. You guys also have multiple stakeholder influences and concerns that you have to satisfy. You have city requirements. You have stormwater things to consider. You have owner concerns, budget concerns, a lot of different things to think about, and some of them are in conflict. Your projects are complicated, sometimes on multiple year timescales, and to fulfill them, the projects have to be fulfilled in a just-in-time fashion, which is very challenging as well, which means they're difficult to predict and they don't repeat themselves. And the lack of a broad range of plant branding that meets the needs of specifiers. And what I mean by that is, I've talked to many architects, and they don't feel like they can specify a supplier. They could specify a product though. And what they mean by that is a widget. So you could specify a Hunter sprinkler head, but there is no equivalent thing when it comes to plants. You could specify a proven winter plant, but the proven winter plant is simply the genetics of the plant. There are no uniform plant brands when it comes to trees, where you know the branching height, you know the root system and how it was developed, you know the way it was pruned. That doesn't currently exist. So, that's something that the nursery industry needs to get its arms around to help facilitate your guys' challenges and helping you guys have more success in terms of getting what you want created and designed. So the next slide is something I want to help you guys understand at the local level now. This chart here shows you kind of how the season works in the nursery business here at Arbor Valley. This is 1 year, and 1 is January and 12 is December. And so this shows you the timeline of how plant material comes in. This is trees, but it's pretty much consistent with anything we would produce, because we have to bring in the dormant tree liners, the dormant shrub liners in early in the season as well. So the top line, you can see, you get this very massive spike, and those are the thousands of trees we bring in per month during that time frame. And then you'll understand as the graph goes down that once we get out of that dormant period, it's hard for us to get resupplied with B&B trees because they can only be harvested when they're dormant. And so you'll see as it levels off, that's us moving to container trees, which container trees are becoming more and more used and prevalent, but you're limited at the top end typically in sizes. And then you come into that in September, we can get back into evergreens and start fall digging evergreens. Then in October, the non-fall dig hazard deciduous trees we can get in, but then we get to November and we don't want to bring any more in because our weather's pretty crazy and it gets a little too cold. Now the darker green graph is the demand. That's when we're shipping things. So as you can see, it doesn't match it. And so you see sort of this ramp up into spring, and then all throughout pretty much the summer, at our company at least, we're very consistent in what we're shipping, month in and month out, week in and week out. But you can probably see as we get into August and September, we start to run out of stuff. And so that becomes a challenge when we get later in the season, because because of B&B, we can only bring in so many. We can only get resupplied with so many. So that kind of helps you understand as we go from the multiple year challenges that we've talked about from our growers to really close to when your projects come about. And in the past, what has kind of our solution been? Well, our solution has been architects try to come in for their projects that are shipped in July, August, September, try to come in those periods of April, May, and June and put tags on all their streets for their products. I can't think of another industry where that happens. Like, you don't get to go to the Ford dealer and say, hey, I'm going to buy a truck in 6 months. I'm going to put a tag on it, write down the VIN, give you no money for it, and then I'll show up and get it maybe in 3 months. Like that doesn't exist anywhere. But in the nursery business, that's kind of how we've done it. Understandably so, because it's a cottage industry and the way plants are sourced, it's kind of a shotgun approach. I do believe there's a better way in the future, but these become challenges. And architects ask me questions, well, how can we procure? How can we secure? How can owners make sure? You know, it's really a big challenge because, you know, honestly, I don't want an owner to prepay for his plants for me, because then it's a liability. You know, if one of those plants dies, do I have another one to replace it with? If his project now gets pushed into next year and I've been holding that plant till October, I've now lost the marketability of that plant for a whole nother season, because the next season, no one wants the carryover plant. So it's a challenge when we're talking about live goods, how we do this with plants that are not, you know, widgets. They die, they grow, they live, they get diseases. It's kind of like ice cream. They become worth something, they're worth a lot, and then suddenly they're worth nothing. So that's a sincere and solid challenge we have. So how can we move the needle? This is a little diagram that we use here at Arbor Valley when we talk to landscape architects about how a chain of communication can work. Typically, you have the owner of the project here, right? And the landscape architect on the left is interfacing in and out with that owner over the course of different and varying time cycles, whether they're doing you know, a full-scale mock-up on a multi-year subdivision to something that's like a Wendy's, you know. And they're interfacing back and forth with the owner. You know, I didn't put the government in here, but you got government interface with that. Then that owner creates that project scope and goes to the general contractor, right? So, you know, the design intent of the LA that the owner bought on is, you know, is usually there's a brand to that, right? Like, they paid for a concept that they want. There's value in that. And when you go then to the market to have it built, we're going to a lowest common denominator factor, right? The low bid wins. So you take something that has a design intent with a budget, go to the owner, it gets bid out to the general contractor, who then goes and gets multiple bids from landscapers. Those landscapers bring me that project list, and then I bid it to the multiple landscape contractors, right? And so, you know, what you end up getting is you get that landscape contractor in there who is usually the least informed and doesn't know much, and their liability is just for the 1 year, right? They're expected to fulfill and supply on time at the lowest possible cost, which is sometimes not in congruence with what the LA's design intent is. And so we only get our information from the landscaper, you know. I don't see the size specs from what you're specifying other than 2.5 inch caliper on a bid form or number 5 on a bid form. And oftentimes you guys might have gone through design, entitlement, and everything. It's 2 years into the project, but you had no idea what was happening with supply. And now we're close to bid time, and we inform the landscaper, hey, these are going to be in tight supply. You know, some of them choose to not wait about it. They choose to wait about it until it's an emergency. Some will do submittals and get ahead of it with the architect. All those proposed challenges for you in emergency situations that don't have to be emergencies. So what we would love to see is more and more communication with the landscape architects directly on giving them an opportunity to understand what's happening with market dynamics, you know, what's available, what's less available, what, you know, and be there as a resource for landscape architects in that regard, and get involved earlier in the process. And then obviously you can see at this point, and from the very first diagram, Arbor Valley sits in that distribution and finished grower scenario there, where we actually can affect change in the supply chain if we can get more demand information from landscape architects and landscape contractors with enough lead time. We can actually help mold up towards the supply chain what is being produced, the sizes, the grades, the quantities. The challenges we face is, again, the more uncertainty we have upstream, the harder it is for us to fulfill. So growers will parcel out their crops among multiple distributors. And so, you go to other nurseries in town that are focused on different segments of the market, and they may carry 30 bur oak. We carry 300. So who we buy from is totally different than some of the other guys in town who they buy from. Just a little bit different market niches. So what if there was a better way, right? So how can we change the future here? How can we get better outcomes? How can we get more plant select plants into the landscape? How can we make sure that by 2050, when we have double the population, but still the same amount of water, we have beautiful, sustainable landscapes in this market? Well, the solution is better communication, but what is the form? Is it the trade show where you're standing and talking to someone on the trade show floor? Is it one-to-one communication with various suppliers you integrate with? Is it this one time a year conference through Plant Select? How do we get foresters, landscape architects, designers, contractors, growers, and distributors together to understand these challenges and come up with solutions? What we need to do is create a network of collaboration while learning more from each other, what we don't already know. So what I'm here to do is introduce a forum that we're a part of, we're happy to be a part of, called NetWorkshop. And NetWorkshop is an event that a company that I own has done for 10 years now in the Kansas City market, which creates 3-time-a-year events that we host, where we have an education workshop along with networking opportunities. And so what it is education focused on the issues of the professional landscape channel. Every key industry stakeholder is invited. My competitors are invited. My suppliers are invited. My customers are invited. Specifiers, foresters, arborists, we're all invited. The forum will have continuing education credits for it, exactly like this program does. And it's focused on local challenges tackled by local partners. We'll be there to educate you about soil, and what you can do about it, about how we're producing these new root systems, so you have better information and understanding when you're specifying or choosing suppliers. What are these new varieties coming to market? What are the clones? What are the supply conditions? Where is Plant Select coming with new products? And how long will it be before it will actually show up? So I would invite you guys after this, we will be keeping in touch with you guys, inviting you to this forum, having this event, hosting it locally, where we start to bend the curve on these challenges that we have and work on it closer together to help these amazing designs and where we need to be in the future, sustainably with plants that are adapted and do well in Colorado, to make that actually come available.